Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Ask the Expert. And sales is one of the things that intrigue me the most because I've been training sales team for years, but I always says I cannot sell you anything, even my life depend on it. I'm talking about the behavioral part of sales, how to connect, how to do first impressions. So when I was thinking about sales and how the ways you can approach it, I found out the science and sales have a correlation. They're not brothers, are almost twins. And I found out that today you cannot use cells or any of the techniques if you don't incorporate the science. So we have an expert because we always curious and find one. And what about data science for cells? What about if I tell you we have Mark Shalinsky, PhD, and now he's in sales? Mark, how you went from academia to sales? I'm really intrigued about that. Welcome to Ask the Expert.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me today. So to use the Marvel Cinematic Universe parlance, my origin story was I was a researcher and instructor at Harvard. I was doing invasive work trying to correlate blood flow with neuronal activity in rats. Met this fellow from the Journal of Visualized Experiments, and he asked if I wanted to publish an article with them. And I said, sure. And then they said, great, we're going to send a camera crew into your lab and film you doing the experiments. At which point, my bosses said, no, we're not filming you. And so I said, I apologize, said, no, we can't move on. So they said, great. Well, would you like to be a science editor with us? And I thought, all right, I could be a science editor. I like science. It gives me the opportunity to talk with all these great scientists around the world. And unfortunately, part of being a science editor at Jove was recruiting scientists to publish in Jove. And that's where I realized, I found out I'm autistically good at cold calling, like very good at cold calling. So I would just make all of these calls to scientists and call the researchers and have them talk about their science and then parrot back to them, said, great, would you consider publishing an article with us? And not just say, would you consider publishing an article with us, but actually tell them what article I wanted to have them publish and paint the story for them. And I had a great conversion rate. We grew, and I managed...
I'm sorry, so you not only ask them for the articles, you tell them what they need to be writing about it.
Yes, so essentially you listen to them, because the great thing is if you can actually reach a scientist in their lab and ask them about their research, they'll tell you what their research is, because scientists are the global expert in a field that nobody knows anything about. So imagine someone finally reaching out to them and say, hey, tell me all about your research. They're super excited to talk about it. And then if you listen and pay attention, you could take that information and say, great, I would love you to publish an article in our journal. And this is to make sure I got it right. So this is what I learned later to gain trust and credibility. Because I was parroting back what they told them and making them realize that I understood what they were talking about, they would trust me, I gained credibility, and then my conversion rates soared. Because we were a small startup company looking for new avenues of sales, we opened up sales to libraries. So I got to learn how to sell to librarians who all picked up the phone, but we're all cutting subscription and had budget cuts. So I learned, this is where I started reading things like Robert Cialdini and Getting Around No, and learning all these different techniques of how to communicate with people. Then we moved over to the next level, which was we'd film these experiments in the lab. And we see this $80,000 device from Thermo Fisher, and we'd call up those companies and we'd say, hey, would you want to sponsor these articles? At which point, this was a colossal failure for me, because now I was dealing with PhDs that had business experience. So I went to an event and I looked at the highest ranking individual for each company I could find. I called it whale hunting. And I would just say, what are your 3 biggest issues selling to a neurophysiologist? And they tell me, and then I go to the next booth. Okay, what are the 3 biggest issues selling to an immunologist? And I built up this massive spreadsheet of the problem selling to neurobiologist, immunologist, any different scientific discipline. And then I did my PhD thing, did some data analysis on it, and I came up with what I call 5x5 messaging. So then I'd call up all these companies and said, hey, you sell to a neurophysiologist. Is this your problem? Nope. Is this your problem? Nope. Is this your problem? Yes. Fantastic. This is how I solve this problem. Then my wife went up, got an academic job, and moved out to Ann Arbor. Sorry, so that's kind of how we got into sales.
Most people would have killed to be in Harvard, and you choose to leave Harvard for, actually people go to the editorial, to maybe scientific, and do all the work to get in Harvard. You left Harvard to get to the other side. What get you fascinated about sales? The data part, the scientific part, the challenge? Because for me, sales is something that is like a complete language that in 40 years, I haven't learned. But you learn it and you put all the experience you have in that. What gets you so intrigued and so driving to work with sales?
Well, there's a couple of things. So when you're in academia, you come up with an idea. As my PhD boss put it, it's like I woke up this morning and I had this great idea, and I would go do the experiment. And it works. It's like fantastic. Then you got to repeat it 30 more times, and then you have to create 5 or 6 other experiments around it, and then you have to publish it, and then the reviewers all get grumpy at you, and then eventually you publish the paper, and 3 years later someone invites you in to give a talk. By that time, you're so sick and tired of that project, you don't want to discuss it anymore. In sales, I have an idea in the morning of who are my prospects. I can fire out a whole bunch of emails. I can fire out a whole bunch of calls. I can go to LinkedIn. I can do my research. I can get these personalized emails. And by the end of the day, if I've done my job correctly, I've either generated revenue, or I've generated prospects or pipeline, or realized, no, that experiment did not work. So I get to do my science faster.
You know what we was supposed to do, and we need to cancel it, a webinar about selling on the digital era. And one of the things that I want for the experts who compromise their time to do it is like, okay, what about if we start shooting emails to everybody that we have been working on the last 2 years in sales? And we have an idea initially that what is going to be the answers that we going to have for expert. And as I told you before we start talking, from people who had been for 20 years on the market, the questions were so basic, and we ended up having like 16 questions and things that were completely 180 degree than what we think the people who is expert know about it. And we have those answers in 72 hours. And the 3 of us was like mind blowing, and like, what the heck? These people supposed to know what they're doing. And people I found out, I don't know what is your experience, but people in sales is one of the most intriguing jungles that I have put my foot on.
Well, the interesting thing about sales is there's no formal education on sales. You've got Sandler, you've got Medic, you've got, individuals like John Barrows and John Selig who are going out and teaching sales, but of over 1,000 MBA course programs in the United States, there's about 16 that have any sort of sales training. So nobody is 5 and says, hey, I want a life in sales. They all want to be something more spectacular, I suppose, a nice term. But then we all end up in sales, and we all come from a very lumpy background. You'll have a PhD, you'll have a physiologist, you'll have philosophy, you'll have an art, you'll have someone who doesn't even have a high school education, and we all have this exact same opportunity to rise through the ranks. So there's no even playing field that comes. There's no standard textbook that says this is what it is. I've been fortunate. I worked in startups, then I worked at Duo Security, and there was a number of different folks who came in. Although we were a startup, they had a lot of experience, and they kind of coached me in the, what are the basics, even little things like net versus gross, simple finance things, how to build a revenue model. I've gone into a company where I thought they understood what they were doing, and then I realized they couldn't build a revenue model. It's like, wow, you've established, So it's because there's no common background that brings people up. Everybody comes with a different set of experience.
So you was talking because one of the most intriguing part when we get connected is like how a PhD ended up in sales. And it's like, I start using my own experience. Like, again, I cannot sell anything even if my life depend on it. So in your case, you're using science applying for sales. So do you know how to sell and the process to use science, or you still applying science on the selling part?
So the one thing that I do is I distill all the information that I have into easy bite-sized pieces. And I call there's two aspects to sales. There's the quantitative side, which is quantitative, it's all numerical and analysis. And there's the qualitative side, which is the communication side, the side that you're far more familiar with. So on one side, on the quantitative side, I'll say, all right, let's look at all the data that we have of who we sold to. My current company, we sell, we move terabytes of content. So humans build terabytes. So obviously humans build content, which makes terabytes. So one thing that we look into is how many people are at that company. So that's one piece of data I have on company. Then I look at industries. We want to have industries where there's lots of humans that could be building content. So now I have 2 data points. And then I say, what are geolocations where there's going to be companies that have humans that make content where there's large enough companies. Now I've got these data points on the company. Now I look at, all right, what are the people who would manage this problem? What are the different service and systems? Now I've got all my quantitative data that is easily measured. I could go to known databases and find them. Then I flip over to the other side on the qualitative side, the soft science skill. And I say, great, I need to talk to these people. So when I pick up the phone, I follow, they call it the John Barrows method, where I get their attention, I tell them the reason I'm calling and ask for permission, drop a credibility bomb, hit my pitch, and then ask them an open-ended question I call the gut punch, that tells them something that I know that I can help them do really well, that they're probably rated on from the quantitative side, and then hopefully use that as a hook to get a longer meeting.
Mark, we cannot hit the time that we use for each Ask the Expert, but I have so many questions. Can we have you back?
Sure, happy to help out.
I don't know if we're gonna use one more segment or 3 or 5, because sales and science is a new topic, and most people don't understand that you need to apply more than like the old salesmen that go door to door on the 70s. Now that has changed so much, and since we have this coronavirus where selling and interaction and human meetings and the way we approach each other has changed so much, we need to use science to know how to better approach the customer and the future prospect too.
So selling in an era of social distancing.
Let's put it, that's for the next one. See you next one, Mark.
Thank you.